Ми відзначаємо Різдво.
We are celebrating Christmas during a very difficult time. Unfortunately, not all of us are able to be home this evening, and sadly, not everyone even has a home.
And not everyone, unfortunately, is able to be with us here today. But despite all the immense hardships and tragedies that Russia has brought upon us, it is utterly incapable of occupying or bombing the most vital and essential thing. That is our Ukrainian heart. This is our unwavering faith in one another, and this is our unbreakable unity. And so millions of us across this land will be waiting in the night sky for the very first star to appear. In the skies of Kiev, Zakarpattia, in the skies of Odessa, or Kupiansk, wherever Ukrainians may be, today they celebrate Christmas together on one date as one big family. Today, we all share one dream and we make one wish for everyone, that he would perish, each will say to themselves. But when we turn to God, of course, we ask for something broader. We ask for peace for Ukraine. We are fighting for this, and we are praying for this, and we truly deserve it. For every Ukrainian family to live in peace and harmony, for every Ukrainian child to be happy with their gift, to smile, and to preserve that incredibly important childhood faith in goodness and in miracles. So that the eyes of our children, our parents, our loved ones, our families finally stop crying. May good and truth prevail. May peace be victorious, and may we be. And Ukraine, it was a nation.
We need to talk about what happened on Christmas Day in Ukraine because while Americans were celebrating with their families, Ukrainians were enduring another day of Russian terror. And the contrast between how different leaders responded to Christmas reveals everything about what's actually at stake in this war and where American leadership stands right now. Volodymyr Zelensky delivered one of the most powerful and defiant Christmas messages I've ever heard from a wartime leader. Meanwhile, Russia continued bombing civilians on one of the holiest days in Christianity, and the gap between those two responses, between Ukrainian resilience and Russian brutality, should clarify for anyone who's confused about this conflict exactly who the aggressor is and what this war is really about. Let me start with Zelensky's Christmas address, because his words deserve to be heard and understood. This wasn't some sanitized political speech designed to avoid offending anyone. This was raw, honest, and profoundly moving, coming from a leader whose country has been fighting for survival for nearly 3 years. Zelensky spoke directly to the Ukrainian people and said they're celebrating Christmas during a very difficult time. Not all of them are able to be home. Not everyone even has a home anymore. And tragically, not everyone who should be there to celebrate is still alive. But despite all the immense hardships and tragedies that Russia has brought upon Ukraine, Zelensky emphasized that Russia is utterly incapable of occupying or bombing the most vital and essential thing, the Ukrainian heart, the unwavering faith Ukrainians have in one another, their unbreakable unity. He painted this image of millions of Ukrainians across the land, waiting in the night sky for the very first star to appear. In Kyiv, in the Carpathians, in Odessa, wherever Ukrainians may be, all celebrating Christmas together on one date as one big family. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. And then Zelensky said something that will probably get sanitized or criticized by people who don't understand what it means to fight for your nation's existence against an invader trying to erase you. He said that Ukrainians share one dream and make one wish, that their enemy would perish. Each person says it to themselves, he acknowledged. But when they turn to God, they ask for something broader. They ask for peace for Ukraine. They're fighting for it and praying for it, and they truly deserve it. Think about the honesty of that statement. Zelensky didn't pretend that Ukrainians are passive victims hoping for the best. He acknowledged the very human desire for their tormentor to be destroyed while also articulating the deeper prayer for actual peace. for Ukrainian families to live in harmony, for Ukrainian children to be happy with their gifts, to smile, to preserve that incredibly important childhood faith in goodness and miracles, so that the eyes of Ukrainian children and parents and loved ones finally stop crying. That's not propaganda. That's the truth of what it means to be Ukrainian right now. And you want to know what Russia's response to Christmas was? They didn't stop bombing. They didn't pause their assault on civilians even for one day. Even on Christmas, Russia continued its deliberate attacks on Ukraine's civilian population. Strikes in Odessa killed one person and injured two others. One civilian was killed in the Kharkiv region, another in the Chernihiv region. People were injured in Zaporizhzhia as well. Russia launched missiles and drones, specifically targeting civilian areas on Christmas Day, while Christians around the world were celebrating peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Let that sink in for a moment. One leader is talking about children's faith in miracles and families living in peace. The other is launching missiles at apartment buildings and civilian infrastructure on Christmas. One nation is fighting for survival and freedom. The other is conducting a war of aggression designed to erase a neighboring country's independence. And somehow there are still people in America, including our own president, who want to frame this as a complicated situation where both sides need to compromise. Ukraine's leadership has been clear about what this represents. Mass murder and terrorism is Russian culture in its purest form. That's not hyperbole when you look at the pattern. Russia has systematically targeted civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, residential areas throughout this war. They've committed documented war crimes, including torture, summary executions, and forced deportations. And they're doing it as a matter of policy, not as isolated incidents by rogue soldiers. This is how Russia fights wars, by terrorizing civilian populations until they surrender. We also learned recently that the U.S. declassified exchanges between President George W. Bush and Vladimir Putin from 2008. And what those documents reveal should end any debate about Putin's long-term intentions. Back in 2008, years before the current invasion, Putin was already calling Ukraine an artificial state and denying its right to exist. This wasn't a recent development triggered by NATO expansion or Western provocation. This was Putin's position nearly 2 decades ago. He has always wanted to control Ukraine. He has always viewed Ukrainian independence as illegitimate. Everything that's happened since has been him trying to achieve that goal. Understanding that timeline is crucial because it exposes the lie that this war is somehow about Russian security concerns or NATO aggression. Putin decided long before any recent geopolitical developments that Ukraine doesn't have a right to exist as an independent nation. The invasion in 2022 wasn't a response to immediate threats. It was the implementation of a long-standing plan to subjugate a neighboring country that Putin views as historically and rightfully part of Russia's sphere of control. And here's what should concern everyone about where American leadership stands right now. While Russia was bombing Ukrainian civilians on Christmas, while Zelensky was delivering this powerful message about Ukrainian resilience and the prayer for peace, where was Donald Trump? Was he standing with the victims of aggression? Was he condemning war crimes committed on Christmas? Was he reaffirming America's commitment to supporting nations fighting for their freedom? No. Trump has spent months suggesting that this war is somehow Ukraine's fault for not negotiating. He's praised Putin. He's suggested that Russia's concerns are legitimate. He's framed Ukrainian resistance as the obstacle to peace rather than Russian aggression. And the message that sends to the world is catastrophic. It tells aggressors that America under Trump will side with power over principle. It tells victims of invasion that they're on their own. It tells dictators that territorial conquest is acceptable if you're strong enough to get away with it. There was actually a bipartisan group of Democratic and Republican senators who recently put out a statement condemning Russia's slaughter of Ukrainians, especially on Christmas. They called Russia the obvious aggressor, the invader. They made clear that war crimes are coming from one side, Russia and Russia alone. And it's good to see some Republicans in the Senate willing to state basic facts about who started this war and who's committing atrocities. But the fact that this even requires a bipartisan statement shows how broken our political discourse has become on this issue. The reality on the ground is becoming increasingly clear despite Russian propaganda claiming otherwise. Even Russian military bloggers, people who support Putin's regime, are having to acknowledge Ukrainian successes in certain areas and criticize the Kremlin for providing false battlefield reports. Sound familiar? Putin, like Trump, operates by denying reality and claiming everything is going perfectly, even when it obviously isn't. When Zelensky visited certain areas near the front, Russian propaganda claimed it was AI, that he wasn't really there. That's the level of delusion Russian state media operates under. The Institute for the Study of War, which does serious professional analysis of the conflict, has assessed that Russian forces are struggling to maintain multiple offensive operations simultaneously. They don't have the manpower or material resources to achieve their stated objectives across all fronts. Russia's efforts are stretching their resources thin, and they'll likely need to deprioritize some areas to concentrate forces elsewhere. This is why the Kremlin is making demands in negotiations that Ukraine cede unoccupied territory. They can't take it militarily, so they're trying to get it through diplomatic pressure. Think about what that means. Russia invaded a neighboring country. They've committed massive war crimes. They've killed tens of thousands of civilians. They've displaced millions. They've destroyed entire cities. And now they want Ukraine to reward that aggression by giving up territory Russia couldn't conquer. That's what Putin means when he talks about peace. Not actual peace where Russia withdraws and respects Ukraine's sovereignty. Peace where Ukraine surrenders land and accepts Russian domination as the price for ending the violence Russia initiated. And here's what's so frustrating. Putin's long-term strategic goal has never been secret. He wants to control all of Ukraine. If Ukraine cedes the Donbas region, Putin won't stop there. He'll use that territory as a staging ground to reinvade later. He'll continue destabilizing Ukraine politically. He'll continue trying to undermine Ukrainian independence until he achieves complete control. This war will never end with Putin in the Kremlin pursuing his goal of erasing Ukrainian statehood. It will go on until he's removed or until Russia is fully defeated and expelled from Ukrainian territory. Ukrainian forces have been incredibly brave and innovative in defending their country. Their use of drone technology has been particularly effective in countering Russian advantages in artillery and manpower. The frontline Ukrainian forces are holding back a much larger adversary through courage, tactical skill, and sheer determination not to let their country be conquered. They're not fighting because they're being forced to by Western powers or because Zelensky is refusing to negotiate. They're fighting because the alternative is subjugation, cultural erasure, and the end of Ukrainian independence. Former Ambassador Michael McFaul put it well when he addressed Ukrainian warriors in the trenches on Christmas. He said he's thinking of them, in awe of them, as they defend freedom not just for Ukraine, but for Europe and the world. Because that's what's actually at stake here. This isn't just about one country's borders. This is about whether we still live in a world where international law matters, where aggressive wars of conquest are unacceptable, where democracies stand together against authoritarian expansion. If Ukraine falls because Western support falters, what message does that send to other authoritarian regimes? China looking at Taiwan, other regional powers eyeing their neighbors, every dictator calculating whether they can get away with invasion if they're strong enough and the target is small enough. The principle that borders can't be changed by force, that sovereignty matters, that aggression will be resisted, all of that collapses if the international community allows Russia to succeed in Ukraine. And that's why Trump's position on this is so dangerous. Every time he suggests Ukraine should just negotiate and give up territory, he's telling Putin that aggression works. Every time he praises Putin or downplays Russian atrocities, he's signaling that America won't stand against conquest. Every time he frames Ukrainian resistance as the problem rather than Russian invasion, he's undermining the basic principles that have prevented major power conflicts since World War II. Zelensky's Christmas message wasn't just about Ukraine's situation. It was a reminder of what nations fighting for their freedom look like. The unity, the resilience, the refusal to surrender despite overwhelming hardship, the faith that good and truth will ultimately prevail. That's what Ukrainian resistance represents. And the fact that they're still standing after nearly 3 years of Russian assault, that they're still fighting effectively, that they're still maintaining their democracy and institutions under wartime conditions is remarkable. Compare that to Russia's performance. They invaded expecting to take Kyiv in days. They believed Ukrainian resistance would collapse. They thought the West wouldn't sustain support. They've been wrong about everything, and now they're reduced to bombing civilians on Christmas, while their military bloggers criticize their own command for lying about battlefield successes. That's not strength. That's desperation from a regime that thought this would be easy and is discovering it's anything but. The declassified documents showing Putin called Ukraine an artificial state back in 2008 should end any remaining debate about who's responsible for this war. This isn't about NATO expansion. This isn't about Western aggression. This is about Putin's neo-imperial ambitions to recreate Russian dominance over former Soviet territories. He said explicitly that Ukraine doesn't have a right to exist. Everything else is justification he invented after the fact to obscure his real motivations. And Ukrainian resilience in the face of this existential threat deserves far more recognition and support than it's receiving from American leadership right now. These are people fighting and dying to preserve their freedom and independence. Children are growing up in bomb shelters. Families are separated. Cities have been reduced to rubble. And they're still fighting because surrender means the end of Ukraine as a nation. That deserves respect, not lectures about negotiating with the aggressor trying to destroy them. The bipartisan Senate statement condemning Russia was important because it shows not all Republicans have abandoned Ukraine despite Trump's position. There are still people in American politics who understand what's at stake and are willing to stand with victims of aggression rather than making excuses for the aggressor. But they're swimming against a tide of isolationism and authoritarian sympathy that Trump has cultivated within the Republican Party. And whether they can sustain support for Ukraine against Trump's opposition remains to be seen. What's clear is that Ukraine isn't giving up. Zelensky's Christmas message made that absolutely plain. They will continue fighting. They will continue resisting. They will continue praying for peace while defending their nation against an enemy trying to erase them. And the question for America and the West is whether we'll continue standing with them or whether we'll abandon them to Putin's imperial ambitions, because sustaining support has become politically inconvenient. Russia bombing civilians on Christmas while Zelensky speaks about children's faith and miracles tells you everything you need to know about the moral clarity of this conflict. One side is defending freedom and independence. The other is conducting a war of aggression and terror. And anyone who can't see that distinction, anyone who wants to both sides this situation, is either willfully blind or actively complicit in enabling Russian aggression. Ukrainian warriors are in trenches on Christmas, defending not just their own country, but the principle that aggression doesn't pay, that freedom matters, that sovereignty is worth fighting for. They deserve better than a U.S. president who praises their enemy and pressures them to surrender. They deserve the sustained support that gives them a chance to win this war and secure the peace they're praying for. Because the alternative isn't peace. It's conquest, subjugation, and the message to every dictator that military aggression against your neighbors is acceptable if you're willing to be brutal enough.